thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Emily Carlson, and you are here for the Stewards Expert Lecture Series. As I said before, we took this show on the road, so I don't have my normal title slide that I would display. It's on my other computer, but I do want to let you know that the Bee Stewards are a part of Oregon State Extension, and they are focused on helping you create habitat on your property to support native bee populations. So if you're interested in learning more about becoming a bee steward and gaining access to resources like this one, but also a self-paced course, you can find that through our website at Oregon State. The other thing I want to note is that something that's really cool about our Bee Steward program is when you go through the program, you'll create a inventory of all of the blooming resources that you have on your property. And when you do that, we will provide you with a list of the plants that you could add to your property, which would increase your bee biodiversity. So really allowing you that expert knowledge that's going to help you fill the gaps on your property and provide resources that bring in even more wild bees. So that's a really exciting part of our program. It just got relaunched this spring, so please feel free to check it out. Awesome. And then our speaker today is actually me, Emily Carlson. So I'm going to introduce myself, which is perhaps a little silly, but my name's Emily Carlson. I am a partner biologist at Pollinator Partnership. But before that, I was a graduate student in Adoni's lab. So I got my PhD from Oregon State in 2024. And my research was focused on understanding the difference between the pesticide exposure profiles of wild bees and the pesticide exposure profiles of honeybees. And I grew up in Oregon. My whole family still lives here. And so I am really excited to have this role as a partner biologist where I can help my fellow Oregonians conserve bees on their property. So without too much further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So today, we are going to be talking about how to think like a conservation planner and create practical solutions for habitat on your property. So let's get rolling. So first of all, I'm here with Pollinator Partnership, and our mission is to promote the health of pollinators, which are critical to food ecosystems through conservation, education, and research. Pollinator Partnership is the largest nonprofit dedicated exclusively to the promotion and protection of pollinators. You might be familiar with some of our programs more than our organization itself. So if you've ever participated in National Pollinator Week, that's something we do. We also have a lot of eco-regional planting guides. We have the North American Pollinator Protection Campaign. And the way I was first introduced to Pollinator Partnership, which is through these posters that they release every year. And this year, it's all about butterfly larvae. So it's called Life on a Leaf. So partner biologists have a special relationship with NRCS. So my role is to provide conservation-related support to producers, private landowners, and conservation professionals. So what does that mean? It means that if you need help figuring out what plants to plant on your property, you can give me a call. I'll come out, walk the property with you, talk about habitat design, prep, and maintenance, give you some recommendations and support. I also do educational events just like this one, or other field days as well. So please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. And I said I'm a partner biologist with NRCS. So if you're not familiar, NRCS is the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and they're a part of USDA. Their mission is to deliver conservation solutions so that agricultural producers can protect natural resources and feed a growing world. So NRCS is a non-regulatory agency here to provide technical assistance to you. Well, NRCS actually has a very interesting past. And for those of us that are interested in history, I thought we'd take a small detour. So NRCS actually was founded in the 30s after the Dust Bowl. So you might be familiar with photos like this one on the left. The Dust Bowl was a economic and environmental tragedy that hit the United States in the 30s. And essentially what had happened was the Great Plains had been farmed and tilled very deeply. The native plants, which had deep roots to hold the soil in place, had been removed and replaced with exotic plants. And these plants couldn't hold the soil in place. So giant dust storms started to blow across the United States. This photo, which is very iconic in American history on the left, this woman was fleeing the agricultural tragedy that happened because of the Dust Bowl. So this is a huge part of America's history. NRCS was originally known as the Soil Conservation Service, and we were founded to prevent disasters like this from ever happening again. Now, we deal primarily with, or NRCS is focused on soil health, and that is one of their major missions, but they also help plan natural resources in lots of different categories and can help you with many different things on your property. The other thing I want to note is that NRCS offices are located in your community to address your specific concerns. You might not know it, but you probably have an office in your county with staff who are ready to help you. NRCS invests over $9 million every day of the year to help producers stay profitable and productive. And there are 2,500 offices located throughout the nation providing information, tools, and delivery systems for producers to conserve and maintain their natural resources. And again, I just want to highlight that NRCS and the Partner Biologist Program are completely non-regulatory. And so everything we're going to be talking about is just voluntary and intended to enhance environmental and commercial viability on your farm. So for today's talk, we're going to focus on 3 areas. So the first thing we're going to do is talk about what resource planners look for and how they think about natural resources on your farm. We'll talk about the types of assistance that you can receive if you have natural resource concerns. And then we're going to walk through a little bit of a planning exercise and kind of practice or imagine what you would do if you were a planner that walked onto a property and how you might help someone. Okay, so I keep saying that NRCS conserves natural resources and that soil is this foundation. But what do we actually consider when NRCS staff is going out on a property? So resource concerns fall into 6 categories. And people have tried to make this a pronounceable acronym. I've heard like SWAPI. So maybe SWAPI is the acronym that will help you remember. But any one of these might be identified by a resource planner for technical assistance and financial assistance, so helping you improve your resources. So let's talk about that first one, soil. So some of the goals for soil are to reduce compaction, increase organic matter, and improve soil fertility. You can get help with water, including capturing runoff, managing irrigation, reducing flooding on your property. Air might mean reducing dust, capturing any sort of emissions that are coming off your property or odors even. We think about plants, and for that, we have both productivity and then also pest pressure. So you would want to help improve yield, manage pest outbreaks, help people understand how to implement IPM. Animals is kind of my bread and butter. That's where I spend a lot of my time, because this deals with forage and habitat. So both creating wildlife habitat and also supporting sustainable grazing for animal health. So I mostly do wildlife habitat planning. And then humans and energy, because we are also part of this system. So supporting energy efficiency and helping humans that live on the land. We don't want to forget about ourselves. So this is an example of a conservation practice sheet for a hedgerow. So this is a practice that might be recommended to address any one of these resource concerns. And you can see here that the conservation practice has this code. So you might hear NRCS planners refer to 422, and that means hedgerow planting. But it's going to have all of these specific designations for what NRCS considers a hedgerow. But why is NRCS installing a hedgerow? Well, first of all, maybe it's going to create habitat for wildlife. Maybe it's going to help capture nutrients that are moving off of a field and increase infiltration into the groundwater. Maybe it is going to intercept pesticide drift that's coming off a neighbor's field. Or maybe the area is highly compacted and you want to use native plants to break apart that soil and improve your soil quality. So what I want to highlight here is that these resource concerns can be addressed. Multiple resource concerns can be addressed by a single conservation practice. And that gives us a lot of opportunity to do multiple types of good at the same time. All right, so NRCS offers both technical and financial assistance to cooperators who are interested. So technical assistance could be a specific resource concern, or it might address the whole farm. So let's say you start out working with a planner and you start with getting pest management on your farm, and then you move into getting a composting facility. And this leads to whole farm management and whole farm conservation planning. And I do want to highlight that this can provide financial assistance. And there are many different forms of financial assistance that you could get access to depending on where you live and within the state and also within your county. But generally, financial assistance is going to fall into 3 potential categories. So you could get financial assistance to improve natural resources on your property in one of these 3 categories. So the difference between working lands, land retirement, and land easements is how the land is currently being used and what you plan to use it for in the future. So that is the specific length of time that it must be maintained. So most of our work happens with working lands. So that means that it is still in production. It could be forests, it could be a farm, it could be areas around your farmstead. And this is kind of our bread and butter of the type of work we do. But there's also land retirement. And land retirement means that you are entering into agreement to take your land out of production and put it aside for some other reason. And easements are essentially conservation for an extremely long time. And this is usually like a 100-year lease from the government. So you're agreeing not to take any action on this property for anything other than wildlife or natural resources for 100 years. So because of that, we're going to talk mostly about working lands. So working land programs are those which allow private land to remain in production while you're implementing conservation practices. And again, we want these to be focused on a specific area so that we can document that water or soil or wildlife habitat has improved. The most common program that you're going to see when you work with NRCS is called EQIP, which is the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. And this is usually where producers come in the door, and it helps agricultural producers address natural resource concerns on these working lands. Now, as we talked about briefly, my example with the hedgerow planting, right? Like all of these EQIP practices could help improve specific multiple natural resource concerns at the same time. But they do have applicability to pollinator health and pollinator habitat, which is kind of what we're going to focus on. So I'm going to highlight these 5 here, and we'll talk about what they actually mean on the ground. So conservation cover is a permanent herbaceous cover that is intended to protect soil and water resources. And it can't be used for forage production. So you're essentially establishing a permanent herbaceous plant cover with a mix of native wildflowers, selecting species from multiple bloom periods, and allowing pollinators to, visit that area. And we specifically want to highlight native plants or naturalized plants, and increasing plant diversity. We also have the practice of field borders, which are 386. And the goal of this is to reduce erosion from wind and water, and also capture sediment as it's moving across the surface of the waters. I think this is really interesting, but sediment itself is a major contaminant of water because it increases the cloudiness of that water, and it makes it hotter, which makes it more difficult for fish and other wildlife to live in. So this protects water quality and reduces the nutrients which are entering the water running off of the field. And again, you could use this practice to serve both improving your surface water quality and pollinator habitat at the same time. Similarly, you could use a filter strip. So the point of this is to go around irrigation ditches and reduce surface water flow. And again, we're going to want to include native wildflowers that can tolerate high levels of sedimentation, so tolerate having more soil put down on top of them, and provide nectar and pollen at the same time. Okay, now these last 2 are the ones which are most common and which I use all the time. So hedgerow plantings are what you might be most familiar with when it comes to a conservation practice on a farm. Sometimes these are called living fences. So they're trees, forbs, vines, and shrubs that are established in a line. And there are lots of ways you could design a hedgerow. As we said before, you could design it to intercept pesticide drift. You could design it to provide pollinator habitat. Obviously, you wouldn't want to do both of those at the same time. But, you can see how this is a tool which can be adapted to the situation that you're in. And then we have wildlife planting, which is what I deal with the most. And the goal of wildlife planting, number 420, is to target a specific group. So for us, that's pollinators, right? But you could get more specific. You could say you want to target bees. You could say you want to target monarchs, and we will help design plantings that fit those specifications. And part of that is making sure that the plants that you're choosing are actually going to support that wildlife, and that it resembles the historic native plant community. So that means working a lot with our extension partners and understanding kind of what that natural state would be. Okay, so we talked through how to think like a NRCS planner, what these people are looking for when someone might come out onto your property. And we've talked a bit about what types of assistance you might be able to receive. So both like what are the financial resources available, and then also what are the technical resources available for you. And remember, those don't have to always be the same. You could get technical assistance without financial assistance. And now I am going to walk you through a little bit of practice resource planning. So let's imagine an example farm, and let's say that we're going out as planners looking for natural resource concerns. So the goal is to kind of get you in the headspace of reviewing these scenarios so that you can identify resource concerns on your own property. And if you end up working with NRCS, it'll give you an understanding of the language that they use to communicate, and that will help you be more effective when you're working with them. Okay, so first of all, we have this horse farm, and this is what our pasture looks like when you walk out there. It's pretty lumpy and it's pretty low. So let's say that we have this horse farm. They have 3 horses in a large pen that they use for grazing and exercising the horses. You've been invited to visit because our rancher is concerned with the quality of forage that her horses are receiving. So, right, remember this, when you walk onto the site, you see this field, and makes sense. Our landowner is right. Horses probably aren't loving grazing on this field. And so they have 1 large pen, and a local creek runs through the property. The horses drink water from the creek and can walk straight up to the bank. Manure from the barn is composted, but manure in the field is left to decompose naturally. The composted manure is used in the ranch's veggie garden, which is just for their personal family use. So here you see an image from the barn. So you can see that there's some mud built up around the fence. And then here is their composting system, and they are putting these things out onto the vegetable garden. Okay. The next thing that you notice when you're walking around the farm is that this stream, right, the horses can walk right up to it. And so you're noticing some of this type of stuff happening around the stream. And so my question to you would be, let's think about what types of natural resources concerns we might have on this property. So here's some of our photos, right? And the main things that I would identify that I might be thinking about are the erosion of the bank by that stream, right? And the potential for an overgrazed pasture. And the potential for manure that's being deposited in the pasture to leak onto the stream. We also saw that that gate was really muddy, which means maybe we're having some issues with compaction, some issues with water management around there. And so when you're thinking about what recommendations you might make to the landowner, right, you could think about, I'm going to back this up so we can see. Here they have 1 giant paddock, right? I should also say, when we're thinking about our resource concerns, the main one that the landowner identified for us was forage, right? So you were called out here because the landowner wants to improve their forage. Well, there's other opportunities here as well, because improving that forage is also going to mean you want to improve the health of the pasture. And right now, the horses can just kind of wander wherever they want to go. So one of the things we might consider doing is getting these horses an alternate watering facility and providing fencing so that they're not wandering straight up to the bank of the river or of the creek in order to drink. We might think about cross fencing so that we can divide this pasture up into multiple paddocks and give some of those pastures a break and allow them to recover. And yeah, we might think, and so the main concerns that I would have would be some for the soil quality, the water quality, and the plants. And then, of course, there's also opportunities to improve wildlife habitat here as well. If you are going to be installing native vegetation along the stream in order to sort of reduce that flow, slow that water down as it's moving across the landscape and capture some of those nutrients. You could also plan that area to improve habitat for wildlife at the same time. Awesome. And then our next one real quick. So we have this cherry orchard, which is adjacent to some railroad tracks. And the orchardist has concerns about a pest that is infecting their cherries. So this is a real pest, unfortunately. It is called spotted winged Drosophila. And if you haven't dealt with spotted winged Drosophila before, that's great. It is an absolute nightmare, especially for cherry growers, because you get the fly reproduces in any soft-bodied fruit that is left out in the environment. And so you can see you get these tiny ovipositor scar. So the fly comes and lays an egg on the cherry, and then that opens up a hole for other pathogens or insects to get in. So you can see that this really reduces the quality of the fruit, and most of these would be unsellable. So because of this, the orchardist is aggressively spraying the cherries with a strong insecticide and is still losing a large volume of fruit to spotted winged Drosophila. So that is the situation when you are called out. What do you see when you get to the site? Well, the first thing that you see is that the orchard is very, what we would call in industry, clean. So there is not a lot of vegetation between the rows. It's kept very low. There's not a lot of bloom. It's just kind of grass. But you notice that the railroad tracks that go through the property have a fair amount of invasive weeds on them. And does anyone recognize any of these weeds? Hopefully you can say it in the chat. Hopefully you're all screaming in the chat that this is Scotch broom in the back. You can see the Scotch broom, that bright yellow bloom. And then also blackberries in the front. So you can see the blackberries as well, which is another invasive plant we have here in Oregon. And so when you're thinking about what challenges this landowner is facing, right, they brought you out to their property because they are experiencing high pest pressure, and that's reducing their yield. So they are concerned about pea here. And while we go out, something that I would immediately think of is spotted winged Drosophila can reproduce on any soft-bodied fruit. So the fact that you have these invasive blackberries nearby is providing a reservoir of pests that are continually invading your field. Even though your field has been sprayed, they have a refuge where they can go and hide, and therefore, they're continuing to attack throughout the season. And so, to me, obviously, we have the concern of poor quality of habitat, right? This blackberry and Scotch broom really isn't doing much for anyone besides potentially rats. And we could improve it. But also, we have air as a potential resource concern. So this railroad track might be very loud. It might be very dusty, right? You might want to intercept some of that dust that's coming from the railroad. And so when you're thinking about this, right, what tool would you choose from your toolbox that could help improve this situation? Well, to me, it seems really ripe for a hedgerow or a field border, because you could at the same time remove invasive plants and then replace those with ones which are not going to contribute to spotted winged Drosophila pressure and instead are going to support native pollinators. And as I said, that's not all. I highlighted a few of our practices that we use at NRCS most commonly, or that I use at NRCS most commonly, but there really are a lot of potentials that you could benefit from. So we have a forestry section that deals with forest stand improvement and upland wildlife habitat management. Of course, they work in riparian areas and cover crop. Structures for wildlife means creating things like snags and large woody debris, stream habitat improvement and management, and then riparian forest buffers as well. So all of these practices are ones that are through EQIP, but there are even more that I have not listed here. And so just kind of reviewing what we chatted about today, we talked about how NRCS planners assess a property and what resource concerns they're looking for. We also talked about what types of assistance are available for landowners who are seeking it. And we did a little practice planning. I'm sorry that you guys couldn't participate with me the way we normally would, but I look forward to our discussion. So what would be next? Well, if you are interested in working with NRCS, there is, of course, a very structured process that you would follow. So the first is to have a site visit and to do planning. So you would reach out to your local NRCS office or myself to help discuss what your goals are and create a conservation plan. After your conservation plan's been created, let's say you decide you want to install a hedgerow. So with help from NRCS staff, we would help you complete an application that would go up for financial assistance. NRCS will file the paperwork to make sure that you are eligible for assistance, because of course this is the federal government, so we want to make sure we dot all of our I's, cross all of our T's. And then our funding is, limited. We have a certain amount of money every year, and NRCS ranks applications according to local resource concerns. So if I am wanting to install a hedgerow in an area where there is already a priority for reducing pollution in that watershed, that might get me more points, etc. And then if selected, you would sign a contract and begin implementing the conservation practices. And it's not, obviously it goes practice by practice, but essentially NRCS provides generally about 50% cost share on most of the practices that we support. So I want to say thank you so much for your time this evening and for listening. My contact information is here. It is ecarlson@pollinator.org. This little QR code actually is not related to my talk at all. It is instead related to the Bee Stewards Lecture Series in general. So we are really excited that people are interested in this series, and we're always looking for ways to improve. And right now we're thinking of what time of day or what time of month we might want to hold these moving forward. So if you're interested, we really would appreciate your input on kind of what might work for your schedule. So please scan this QR code, let us know what interests you, and then we can better serve your needs. Awesome. Okay. Now I'm going to go back to my here. Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Now I'm going to open it up for any questions that anyone might have, and I'm happy to answer those for you guys. Yes, I will. Great question. So Rachel really hit the nail on the head that we're asking resource planners, the average conservation planner, to be an expert in a little bit of everything, which is why partner biologists like myself can really bring a lot to the program. So, for example, you know, we have a bird specialist who focuses only on bird habitat. And therefore, if we have a question about where to, like what birds might need or how to accommodate their habitat, right, we go to that person. And same with sort of like water rights or irrigation, right? We have people within our office that are designated for every specialty. And so even though I, might not be a water rights specialist, I can go to someone who does have that ability. And I do want to note that, I think it would be, I just think it's important to say that, the last year has brought a lot of changes to our federal programs, and we're still navigating exactly what that means in a lot of ways. And so, if you are interested in getting technical and financial assistance, the people at NRCS, we are here to help you, and we are dedicated to this work. And we're a little understaffed right now, so it might take a bit longer than normal. Yeah. So how does the plant list that NRCS have differ from something like Pollinator Partnership's recommendations or Xerces Society's recommendations or Oregon State? And the good news is that all of those organizations are working together. So there is broad agreement on kind of what types of plants we want to see. NRCS has typically erred on the side of giving you more options. So working with this, working with a landowner, right? I've had landowners I work with that were given a list of like 45 plants that they could use, and sometimes that can be intimidating to people. So it can be nice to have someone to work with you to kind of whittle that down a bit, depending on what your site conditions are. And that's the other thing I would say is different about the plant lists you'll get from NRCS compared to something you might generically find on the internet. Is you're getting a list that someone who has expertise in soil and plants is going through and making sure these plants will actually grow on your site. And that even goes down to like area by area. So for example, I might say, hey, this plant A is really great to go in this site, but it really needs full sun. So don't put it in site B, only put it in site A. And that's the sort of recommendations that we can provide. We have a question in the chat that said, if you have a property that's not designated for a farm, but has habitat and fire suppression, can your services potentially still provide financial assistance? Great question. So it's going to depend on your property. Some rural properties are like, I think the cutoff is you have to be registered with the Farm Services Agency. And so some people are registered with the Farm Services Agency, even though they're not producing like a crop that they're not like a intense agricultural producer. They're more like a family farm. And so that is a way that we can still work with people. I would say if you are not if you're not like an agricultural producer, but you want financial assistance, I would direct you to your local soil and water conservation district, because they're going to have a lot more flexible programs that can help you. And that's another great way that NRCS can help people out, is kind of knowing who is in the area. So I have definitely had projects where I meet with someone and it seems really cool, but unfortunately, for whatever bureaucratic reason, it doesn't fit into the buckets that I can give them money for. And so instead, I can pass them off to another group that might have funding for them. But yeah, we're really focused on agricultural production because that's our mission. That's the mission as the organization. And so we don't necessarily have too much flexibility, but we do know other people who do. And I also will say, if you have educational needs as well, if you have a grower group that you want to provide education to, that's also something NRCS can help with. Do we have recommendation for plants that do well in outcompeting Scotch broom and blackberry on a site that doesn't use herbicide? Oof, that is a hard one, but I love it. So the first thing I would say is the number one predictor of success for any new planting is site prep. So if you're not going to use herbicide, that's totally fine, but you are going to be mechanically attacking those weeds and culturally controlling them as much as you can. So you might have heard the new recommendation for Scotch broom is spread primarily through seed. And so reducing the amount of soil disturbance that you do when you're controlling that Scotch broom is really going to set you up for success. And so instead of pulling large Scotch broom, what we're now focused on is cutting them. So anything that's bigger than the width of your thumb, cut to the ground and keep cutting it to exhaust it, because pulling that Scotch broom out is going to expose more seeds. I think the seeds can last like up to 70 years in the soil, and every plant produces like thousands. So it's a real big, 70 years. It's a real big battle. So that would be my first one. And then the first thing to keep in mind, blackberry is a little bit more standard. You can grub out the hearts, the roots, right? And then once that site prep has been completed, I would choose plants that form like dense mats. So a lot of like roses are good for this. If you've ever worked with swamp rose, it will form kind of like a dense rhizome network underground that will kind of help keep those other plants down. Snowberry can be another good one. But again, it's going to depend on what the site conditions are. So like if you have full sun or if you have shade, right? Like what plants you would want to see. But I would go after things that form those dense mats, like roses and other kind of those shrubby plants. A lot of those also will reproduce in like riparian areas. Like willows would be a great one too. Those will really take off. Oh, and poison oak. Oh my gosh, yeah. Poison oak, bane of my existence. Knock on wood. Every time I go into the field, I get a little scared of it. Yeah, so I completely understand the struggle with herbicide. And, NRCS, when it comes to chemical recommendations, that is something that we're legally not allowed, or I say we, the agency is legally not allowed to provide specific chemical recommendations. And that's because they're a government agency and they don't want to be providing favoritism to anyone, right? And saying like, oh, use this product, it's great. And so, because of that, there's a little bit of trickiness, but we can still rely on other partners, like Oregon State can recommend herbicides, and IPM centers can recommend herbicides and things like that. But yeah, no, oak prairie habitat is definitely sensitive, and I understand wanting to avoid chemicals around it. Oh, wonder if there are any surveys that do test soil if plants aren't doing well to see if it's the right habitat type. Ooh, that's a great question. I know some soil and water conservation districts do soil testing for free. Usually that soil testing is focused around nutrients. And so that would be more like crops that aren't doing well. And then you would know what type of plant or what type of nutrients you'd want to add to improve your yield. The other thing I would say is really think about your soil type. So I would I feel like we should have a chat, Cole, but I would recommend going to websoilsurvey.com or .org. It's part of our public resources. And you can type in your address and look up what type of soil you have on your property. And that's a really useful tool. That's one of the things I do when I'm going out on a site and want to make recommendations. They do have mellitiflora. It essentially takes all the Oregon Bee Atlas data and visualizes it for you. So that's one of the things that's useful for justifying like why you're selecting certain types of plants, right? You can say, this plant is utilized by this many taxa, or we're focused on conservation of bumblebees, and we know that within this county, bumblebees are using primarily these flowers. And so that's one of the ways that I like to use that tool. But as far as like space, not space, area, unfortunately, I just don't have that. But someone should make it. The other question someone had was why horses drinking from the stream might not be good. Thank you so much for bringing that back up. I definitely don't want to leave it on the table. So the reason why allowing horses to walk up to the edge of a stream to drink might not be good is not because of the drinking. It's because of that means that it's very easily accessible. And so when it rains, as it does in the Pacific Northwest, it's going to carry all of the manure and the nitrogen that's in the manure, any pathogens that are in the manure, kind of through the field and down on into the stream. So just want to highlight, there's nothing wrong with, the horses drinking. It's more that indicates that they have unfiltered access. And so rather than giving them a stream that they could walk right up to, which also means they could poop right in it, unfortunately, providing them with an alternative water source and then, blocking off that stream so that they're not walking right through it. Thank you, guys.